My name is Mirna Manteca, and I'm a biologist. I'm currently Mexico Program Road Ecology Coordinator with Wildlands Network. Environmental conservation or biological conservation and social justice go hand in hand because they're part of the same puzzle, right? We people are part of the ecosystem. We people are part of the issue. And I might be wrong here, but I do think that these two get separated a lot, like the social justice and the conservation part, by people from the global north who live in larger cities where everything you could possibly need is like right there in some way or another. And those of us who live in smaller communities or people who actually live off the land, we actually see that you can't separate the two. Conservation without the human component is not conservation at all, period. It's just gardening, right? And as far as an example, well, here where I live in northern Mexico in a small town called Cananea. And this is the Sky Island region, right? So we've got disconnected mountain ranges surrounded by grasslands or desert. And where I am, this is a big open grassland and it's very overgrazed and very eroded, and mesquite is encroaching in, so it's just invading everything over the past years. And there are a couple of organizations and projects out there working on erosion control and grazing best practices with the community, but very few are actually considering the real problem in the picture. So here in Cananea, we have, I think it's the second largest copper mine in the world. It's huge, and it's pumping the land dry, like completely. You can see it, and the people who live here and work here and have been here for generations, we can all see it. And the thing is that the mine has bought water rights from the communal lands or the ejidos here, and is giving people access to a very small percentage of the water. They're giving them money, but they're taking their water, right? So people can't grow food anymore. Like agriculture is just not viable here anymore. So they're turning to cattle ranching, and they need to live, right? So they need cattle to live. But the cattle, since it's so dry, they're overgrazing. So it's a big problem. The mine's wells are 2 or 3 times deeper than the community. So people, there's just no access to water, and that's like the root of the overgrazing. That's the root of the mesquite encroaching because of the cattle eating mesquite and just dispersing the seeds. So it's a big issue, and it's hard, right? The social justice part of conservation is the hardest part. It's not the science, it's not the communication, it's the people part. And the conservation problem here is about power and governance. And working on invasive control and erosion control is like putting a band-aid on a hemorrhage. Well, as a scientist, as a researcher, and a conservationist, I'm not sure there's ever been a time where I'm just not able to do my job. But I do have a couple of stories I would like to share. I was once on a nature walk at a national park that's like right on the border, and we were out with a couple of Mexican students, and we were just hiking around, and it was a really nice day. And at the end of our hike, we were having lunch in the picnic area, which was beside the visitor center, but there was like this wooded area in between, right? So we're, finishing our lunch. We're packing our things in our backpacks and, plastic bags for garbage and stuff. And as we're walking to our car and we're coming out of this wooded area, we see a large truck with an older white couple. And they look at us and they gasp. They're like, and they point at us and they like talk to each other and they just go by and we're like, well, fine, right? We just carry on. But as we're getting into our truck and our backpacks and our bags and everything, they drive by again and they start pointing and gasping and we're like, fine, right? But as we are leaving the park and getting onto the highway, we get pulled over by a border patrol. And the officer was very nice, but he walks over and he's like, you know, I just got a call, a very like a frantic call by these people saying that a bunch of Mexicans were scrambling into a truck, and we were like, well, that was probably us, but if you want to see our paperwork, well, here we have it, and the officer just laughs and he was like, no, what, you're fine. We get these calls all the time, so I mean, it's not like I was not able to do my job, but those little things, they're just really, really annoying. Really, it hurts somewhere. I can't even describe. And then this other time, again, working on the borderlands here, there are Border Patrol checkpoints on the highway. So me coming from Mexico to the US, I had to drive through those, right? And this one time, I was driving through one and the officer asked me for my visa and I handed over to him and he just looks at it with an expression, like a condescending expression. And he's like, where do you work? And I said, oh, it's a conservation nonprofit. I do this and that. And he interrupts me. He's like, a nonprofit? They couldn't get anyone from here to work in a nonprofit? Like really condescending, like making fun of me way. And I was like, well, no, not really. Not with my skills. And the guy just looks at me and he doesn't say anything. He walks over to his friend and he brings the dogs to sniff me like a couple of times. And he just hands me my papers back and he doesn't say a word. But really, like, you had to be that rude? It's really... It's like one more thing you have to worry about, right? You know, I have my life, I have my work, I have my problems, and then there's just one more layer of stuff that happens. And to be honest, working here in the borderlands, I'm always more alert and more cautious and feel more vulnerable when I'm on the US side of the border. I don't think I've gotten to a point where I haven't been able to do my job. But one thing that has been interesting to me in my personal and professional experience, like cross-border, is that my identity changes depending on what side of the border I'm in. And that's always been confusing to me, like how people see me. In Mexico, if I had to tag myself, I'm white, right? My family is from Spain. In the US, I'm automatically tagged as a person of color, which is fine. I love it. But so then which one am I? And it has to do with the whole perception thing again, but it just feels different on depending on what side of the border I'm in. And something that also has an issue, I would say, is that conservation is different in different countries, right? And transboundary conservation here is difficult because usually, I won't say always, but conservationists from the US assume that what works in the US will work here in Mexico, and it just doesn't. And it's very hard to explain. It's very, very hard to explain that difference because it's a cultural difference, it's a legal difference, it's a systematic difference. And that's something, that's a struggle that I've always had to deal with. I wouldn't want to go much into detail, but right before I left my previous job, there was a lot of friction with a new supervisor that had come in, and this person didn't agree how I was working in Mexico. And this person had never worked in Mexico before. So there was like a lot of friction. And what was happening during one event, I would call it, is that I was being tone policed and wasn't aware of it because I didn't even know what that thing was. I didn't even know that tone policing existed. And one of my colleagues, like, he really stepped in and pointed it out to my supervisors and pointed out that it was not okay and that my position and my opinions were valuable and there was a reason why I was acting the way I was acting. In the end, it didn't really change anything, but it did feel really nice to have that support. And it was funny, not like laughing funny, but to realize that I was being treated differently and that I couldn't even tell. Like, I couldn't tell. It was normal for me until it was pointed out by someone else. And it felt like I was really grateful for that. Really grateful. And suddenly, like, it all made sense, right? And since then, I have been reading a lot about white privilege and nonprofits and tokenism, and it's huge. But it's there, and people get treated differently. Maybe it's just a little bit, but they do get treated differently, and it's important for colleagues to point out those situations. Educate yourself. Read and learn and do your homework and avoid tokenism at all costs. Don't hire people just because they make you look better. And don't expect the people of color in your organization to educate you, right? It's not their job. And don't be afraid or don't be threatened by different. Different is always better. Diversity is always better.